Hello, I'm coming to you from London, of all places. I'm still here in London. My son just got married, and so we've been enjoying that marriage. And while this was all happening, last Friday, a well-known literary figure, you all know him, Salman Rushdie, was attacked by a certain Hadi Matar. He was attacked in New York. He was giving a speech on the subject of how United States was a safe haven for persecuted writers and also for artists. Ironically, that's what the speech was about. And this Hadi Matar, this 24-year-old who is a supporter of the Shiites and supporter of Iran, and got an acceptance to attend the ceremony. Why he wasn't frisked beforehand or why they didn't look for knives beforehand, I don't know. That's yet to come out. What we do know is that Salman Rushdie was rushed to the hospital. We do know that he received wounds, probably will lose his eye. In his neck he also received wound. Also they severed the nerves on his hand, and he was also stabbed in the kidneys. So he is, though conscious, and he's even joking at the moment. Looks like he will survive, though he will have wounds for life. So this all happened on Friday. We're now Tuesday, the next week. I have been traveling, and this is the first I've been able to get to talk about it. But I thought what I would do, others have done a good job of unpacking it. David Wood did a good job. Hatun did an interesting, fascinating interview with a Muslim down at Speaker's Corner. Islam Critique has done a good background, asking some serious questions that need to be asked about how could the Satanic Verses in particular be in the Quran if this is indeed a revelation from God, and questions concerning Muhammad's ability to understand the difference between Satan and Allah. So these are good videos that have been put out there. What I would like to do is just try to understand what is behind this. What's going on? Where is this hatred and anger coming from? And what is it about this book, the Satanic Verses? But it's all about this book. Though some would say it's also because of Salman Rushdie himself. He is an apostate who grew up in a liberal Muslim family, so he didn't really have a strong adherence to Islam growing up in India. Then moved and became a British citizen. And I think Satanic Verses was his fourth book. And much of his material in the Satanic Verses is about this difficulty of identification, this difficulty of alienation by those who grow up in one country, go to another country. In his case, as a Muslim Indian who grew up in England. And though it was comical, it was also a book that tried to ask these questions. What do you do when you feel alienated? What do you do? Where do you go? What country do you belong to? One of the ironies, I think, of this whole escapade is that the book itself is written by Salman Rushdie to bring out the problem that those who come from India and live in Britain, this dislocation they have, the fact that they don't feel either Indian or Britain. I feel that. I understand that because I grew up in India, lived in Britain. I'm just now living in America. I don't know where I belong. And so for those of us who are called TCKs, third culture kids, like Salman Rushdie is, we're all in that same boat. We don't identify, we don't know where we belong, either in one country or the other, in one culture or the other. We're not sure. And so this book was written as an exploration of that. Where does your identity come from? What exactly, and who is it? Which country do you belong to most? Which religious faith, now that he's an atheist, or his background in Islam? And he was trying to explore that. And the book was there to do just that. And yet the very people who are attacking it, the people who are burning it, the people who have called for, not for the fatwa himself, but certainly the people who initiated and started the process where the fatwa was then initiated, are the very people this book is directed at. That's one of the ironies. Unfortunately, most of those who are attacking Salman Rushdie have never read the book. They've just looked at the title and assumed it's only attack against those verses. It's much deeper than that, and because of that, I think that's why, for many of those in the West who do understand what Rushdie is about and are aware of what he's trying to express, all the more are bewildered by this reaction. Then again, those of us who know Islam know. Those of us who know Muslims, especially today, know that many times when Muslims attack, they don't really have rhyme or reason. It's whenever they think you're attacking their faith or their book or their man or their place, they take it out on you regardless of what your excuses are, or even regardless of what the subject is about. The book itself, I don't know what genre you would put it into, because it's neither fiction nor is it realism. Maybe it's real fiction, or fictitious realism, because it does take place in the modern day in the 1988. So that's when it was published, and that's about the time that it was supposed to have been written about. These two Indians, one whose name is Jibril Farishta, who is a well-known actor in the Bollywood cinema in India. I think from what I've understood, he was using Amitabh Bachchan, who is a well-known actor in Bollywood, as his influence for this character, Jibril Farishta. And Saladin Chamcha was a voiceover actor who voiced over many, many different characters. He lived in England, but had gone back to India to look back at his roots. They were both on this plane coming to London. And it was a hijacked plane, and as it was traveling over the English Channel, the bomb blew up, and they both miraculously landed in the sea without getting hurt. So you can see this is fictitious to begin with. And Rushdie wanted us to know that. But he wanted to use that environment to try to unpack some more in-depth categories, which he brought back through about 3 different dream sequences through the book. And he wanted to look at, first of all, the first dream was a dream by Mahund. Now, using the word Mahund, that is a derivative of Muhammad. So it could be Muhammad, and that's why Muslims have attacked him for using the word Mahund, that he adopted these verses, these satanic verses. What are the satanic verses? Well, they're chapter 53, verse 19 and 20 in the Quran. We all know that. Any of us who have studied Islam know that these were the verses that supposedly when Muhammad was there in Mecca, he was trying to come alongside the people in Mecca. He wanted to aggrandize them, and they asked him if he could keep these goddesses, Alat and Al-Uzza, in the pantheon, and so he agreed to do so. And then he added another one, Al-Manat. When he gets to Medina, according to what traditions tell us, the angel Gabriel came to him and said, "What have you done? Why have you done this? These are goddesses. This is idolatry." And so his excuse was because Satan had seduced me to do this. Ironically, the verses are still there, and you can see that Alat, Al-Manat, and Al-Uzza are still there, the 3 goddesses. Some would believe that Alat and Al-Uzza are the same goddess. One is a formal name of the goddess, of the Nabatean goddess, who is the wife of Dushara, the god of the Nabateans, whose generic name is Alat, the goddess. And much like Ilaha would be the generic name of the god. But nonetheless, these 3 are well known in the pantheon of goddesses from that time. The fact that he left it in the book, the fact that Muhammad would have left it in the book, is curious in and of itself. And others have brought this up. Why would you leave these words in there? If you've been asked to excise them, why are they still there? And of course, if you can't distinguish what is from Allah and what is from Satan, then what are you doing receiving the greatest revelation? And as the arbiter for the greatest revelation, why are you given that responsibility? So you can see there are many difficulties with this story, and that's why for millennia no one's really wanted to talk about it, and certainly Muslims haven't wanted to talk about it. So when Salman Rushdie puts this as the title of his book and has this Mahund actually question whether or not this should have been adopted, these verses should have been adopted, or has this fellow Salman who seems to be expunging or changing or editorializing pieces of the Quran, you can see why this would inflame many Muslims. But it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask, and Salman Rushdie does that in his book. You have also this Baal character who is a skeptic, and he goes into this brothel where there are 12 women who all have the names of Muhammad's wives. And so this has also incensed an awful lot of Muslims, that he would dare to mock the Prophet like this. A third character, probably another thing that bothers a lot of Muslims, is the character of Aisha, who comes up in many different places in the book. But this Aisha is, I'm assuming she's in India, and she has this view that she wants to go back to Mecca. She's covered with thousands of butterflies to cover her nakedness. And she gets this vision to cross across the Arabian Sea over to Mecca. But those who do so and follow her, they just go into the river, into the ocean and drown. And so you have that also sequence that is there. And then you have another one, which is the Imam himself. This Imam who supposedly lives in Paris, lives in luxury, and so many of the Iranians thought that this was an injunction against Ayatollah Khomeini when he was living in Paris. So you can see why, for these 4 reasons, many of the Muslims do not like this book and have confronted it. Now, in 1989, a fatwa was put on Salman Rushdie's head by the Ayatollah Khomeini himself that he should be killed for this book. And there was a reward. It's upwards of $3 million now, that I understand, because it has been added to here and there since that time. So it's over $3 million for anybody that does kill Salman Rushdie. And immediately was put under house arrest here in Britain for his own safety. And for 10 years he had guards with him that protected him. And this is the kind of life he had to live. Now, because of that book, he was up for the Booker Prize. He was a finalist in the Booker Prize for 1988, I think it was, and also he won the Whitbread Prize. So it is a very accomplished book. It is highly acknowledged by many literary agents, but people have certainly been hurt because of it. Not only has he had this fatwa on his head, there have been others who have been hurt. Let me just give you a list of them. You have in 1991, Ettore Capriolo, who was the translator for his book into Italian. He was stabbed because of his translation. About 10 days later, I understand, the same year, Hitoshi Igarashi, who was the translator for the Japanese version of his book, was stabbed and was killed. So he has died because of his translation. In 1993, William Nygaard, or however you pronounce his name, the publisher of his Norwegian translation, was shot. He wasn't killed. In 1993 as well, Aziz Nesin, who is the translator for his Turkish version, who was in a hotel, and along with many other Alevi academics and artists and singers, the hotel was put on fire and 37 people lost their lives. He surprisingly was able to get away because those who started the fire did not recognize him, though they were looking for him. And then, of course, in 2022, on August the 13th, Salman Rushdie was attacked. Many people thought he would die. I think for the first 24 hours, many thought that this was it for him, but it looks like he's going to survive. So there have been many casualties because of that book against those who have either translated it or who have published it. Now, what was interesting to me was the reaction by people here in Britain when it first came out. You had a number of people who were very critical. Of course, the Muslims are very critical, but there were also others who should have known better, that I was surprised how they came out. One is Shabbir Akhtar. Shabbir Akhtar is a Cambridge philosophy graduate. And I know Shabbir Akhtar. And when this came out, he asked for a negotiated compromise which would protect Muslim sensibilities against gratuitous provocation, assuming that this was gratuitous provocation. Surprising, others that came to agreed with him. Keith Vaz, who I have debated on BBC many years ago. He was a Labour MP, and he wanted the book banned immediately here in Britain. On the other side of the ticket, the conservative Norman Tebbit also condemned it. why, to me, it's odd that you would have conservative and Labor MPs condemning this book. As a result of that, others came out in support of our good friend Salman Rushdie. The journalist and author Andy Smith said this: "We are witnessing, I fear, the birth of a new and dangerously illiberal liberal orthodoxy designed to accommodate Dr. Akhtar and his fundamentalist friends." And the late journalist Christopher Hitchens, who defended Rushdie staunchly, urged critics to condemn the violence of the fatwa instead of blaming the novel or the author. And he said this: "The fatwa was the opening shot in a cultural war on freedom of speech." M.D. Fletcher probably gives us the best response. He's the author of Reading Rushdie, Perspectives on the Fiction of Salman Rushdie, and I'm just going to read what he says here. "It is perhaps a relevant irony that some of the major expressions of hostility towards Rushdie came from those about whom, and in some sense for whom, he wrote." So he's talking about the Indians and the Pakistanis, those here in Britain who burned it. Here's pictures of it, burning the novel when it happened. Of course, they were the first ones to burn it in late 1988 and early 1989, because of which, for which then, of course, the Ayatollah Khomeini gave the fatwa. And he's talking about them. "The manifestations of the controversy in Britain embodied an anger arising in part from the frustration of the migrant experience and generally reflected failures of multicultural integration, both significant Rushdie themes. Clearly, Rushdie's interests centrally include explorations of how migration heightens one's awareness that perceptions of reality are relative and fragile, and of the nature of religious faith and revelation, not to mention the political manipulation of religion. Rushdie's own assumptions about the importance of literature parallel the literal value accorded the written word in Islamic tradition to some degree. But Rushdie seems to have assumed that diverse communities and cultures share some degree of common moral ground on the basis of which dialogue can be pieced together. And it's perhaps for this reason that he underestimated the implacable nature of the hostility evoked by the Satanic Verses, even though a major theme of the novel is the dangerous nature of closed, absolutist belief systems, which he is up against. It is that closed, absolutist belief system which we are all up against, and many of us have had to be have had that thrown at us. There were a number of barristers, I think 12 Muslim barristers, that tried to get it banned on the whole premise of blasphemy, and they gave 6 different reasons why it should be banned here in Britain. Number 1, they said, is that Rushdie had Allah as a destroyer of man. Well, when you stop and think that through, so does the Bible. The Bible destroys men all the way through. And so if you're going to ban the Satanic Verses, you're going to also have to ban the Bible. Number 2, it criticizes Abraham for treatment of Hagar in Ishmael. Well, so does the Bible, and so does the Quran. It criticizes also Abraham in Surah 21. Number 3, this name Mahund, who is a derivative of Muhammad, referred to him as a conjurer and a magician of false prophets. The problem with that is that was not written by Salman Rushdie, or did not refer to, did not at all, did not come from the author at all. That was said by an unsympathetic, a drunken apostate who was part of the story. He says it, so you can't blame that on Salman Rushdie. Number 4, that the whores, these 12 whores that were there in the brothel, who had the names of Muhammad's wives, they said that this was anathema and was injurious to Islam. What they don't realize is that when Salman Rushdie was writing that, he was talking about the symbolism of the perversion and the decadence of the West, in particular, in this case, of London itself, that they would do this at that time. So it did not reflect his own ideas himself. And then number 5, that the Prophet's companions, who Muslims know as righteous companions, the companions of the Prophet, they're referred to as bums from Persia, and also at one place as clowns. what they don't realize is that wasn't Salman Rushdie speaking. That was a hack poet who referred to that, and he was hired to say that very thing. So most of the accusations, the last of which is he criticizes Islam as a legalistic, totalitarian state. Isn't that what many of us have? But that is not blasphemous, because we all know that Islam is totalitarian. We all know that it is legalistic. I mean, that's one of the greatest complaints that we have against Islam from those of us who've been working with Islam for these many years. That's not blasphemy, because that's not criticism of either Muhammad or of Allah, which would be the blasphemy that they're looking for. So that was struck down immediately by the Home Office when they came to try to throw that. And this is what the Home Office said in response. It would not allow further blasphemy persecutions, declaring how inappropriate our legal mechanisms are for dealing with matters of faith and individual belief. The strength of their own belief is the best armor against mockers and blasphemers. And that's really it. If you're going to sit there and try to litigate and try to eradicate and try to kill and stab and bomb and also shoot people who say anything against your Prophet Muhammad, what does that say about your Prophet Muhammad, Muslims? That says pretty much that he cannot be defended except by this means and only this means. Ewan McEwen, I'm going to end with him because he says this: people who are utterly secure in their God should be above taking physical revenge when offended. Perhaps the book burners and placard wavers were, paradoxically, troubled by the first gremlins of doubt. And I think that's really what's going on here. When you stop and look at it, folks, why is it that Muslims have to kill, have to harass, have to go to court, have to censor, have to call and cry out Islamophobia whenever anybody says anything critical, including myself and everybody else? Why do they have to call us hate preachers? Why do they have to kill Salman Rushdie? Why do they have to even burn the book? It's because they know that both their prophet and their book and their God cannot be defended. And this is symptomatic of people who are in doubt themselves. They are so insecure in their God, they are so insecure in their prophet and in their book that the only recourse they have is to, like a dog in a corner, start barking and yelling and screeching and finally start biting. In this case, unfortunately for Salman Rushdie, it's a very painful experience, but he will survive and he will be the better for it. I find it fascinating that already on Amazon, I looked today, and in contemporary fiction, it is #1. It is outselling all other books in contemporary fiction. It is #2 in censorship and politics, and it is the 18th highest best-selling book at the moment in all categories because of what happened last Friday. Muslims, if you don't like what we say, if you don't like what we believe, if you cannot support it any other way, if you cannot defend your own book and your own prophet through word of mouth, then realize that the more you attack us, the stronger we become. The more you attack us, the more people are offended by you and by your sensibilities. Thank God that we don't have that problem. God bless you. This is Jay, over and out.